Hi, everybody. I'm Scott,
And I'm Luke.
And I'm Jonathan.
and this is the No Way to Hollywood podcast. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, I still haven't come up with something better to say. So, yeah, welcome.
You think you're the one who has nothing to say. I say the same dang thing every time. Like, yeah, thanks for being here. Or, yeah, thanks for being here. That's pretty much what I say every time. So
So,
now I've
yeah,
commented.
thanks for being here.
Okay, fine. Take my line. What will I do now? What will I do?
Well, let's see if we can actually find something decent to talk about tonight, guys. I'd like to go back to kind of something from episode one and just kind of dive in a little bit more. As you all know, we did all mention Star Wars as one of the films we saw that helped push us in our interest in the film industry and making movies and all that good stuff. So let's go back and let's talk about just the original Star Wars movie.
Hmm.
Let's start off with what was it about this movie that caught your attention?
Well, I think it's right there in the title for me. There were stars, there was wars. I was into that. Um, Truly, like when I think about being a kid watching Star Wars, it was like there's space, and there's battles happening, and there's like a laser sword, and there's blasters, and that's kind of fun. They're being chased, and they're shooting. I was a kid, and everything that was on the screen that was cool was great. There was nothing like Star Wars. Even when I was a kid in the '90s, it was like what's like Star Wars in the '90s or before? There's nothing. There's really nothing that gets anywhere close to Star Wars.
What
Well,
is
let's just
it?
start with that.
Yeah, yeah. And so help me understand that a little bit more. When you say there was nothing like Star Wars, what is it about Star Wars that was so unique from your perspective?
Wow. Little kid me, I will suggest that I think that it was the combination of science fiction trappings and fantasy that was unique. I don't know of a lot of other that did it really successfully. And really, if you really want to get into it, I would even go farther. And this is me now looking at it. It's a samurai movie and a western and a Flash Gordon serial all put into one story. And I don't know of anything else that takes those three genres and mashes them together with any level of success, let alone to the level of success that Star Wars has. Um, it's got very classic archetypes of fantasy, right? Good and bad. The bad guy's really easy to spot. He doesn't have a face, and he's wearing all black. And when there's a bunch of murdered people, he's like, cool, whatever. He just walks around like, that's the bad guy, And who's the good guy? It's the person who's a kid who wants to do more things and wears white and has to learn all the stuff to beat the bad guy, right? Like, it's very simple stuff. So when you say what made it stand out, I mean, here's the other thing, right? Is I was introduced to Star Wars. I wasn't there when Star Wars came out. I didn't, my dad didn't take me to the theater to show me Star Wars or anything. I just grew up with VHS tapes of Star Wars, Empire Strikes Back, and Return of the Jedi. And in my available rotation of movies I could watch as a kid, Star Wars was one of the easy ones to go to that was like, this is awesome. This is always fun. This always has some cool stuff going on, and I want to watch it. So I mean, truly, as a kid, and being introduced from my brother in particular, but my whole family, liked Star Wars. I mean, it's by the time I showed up into this whole thing, it was already established as being awesome and was already over in the sense if the story was over and everyone thought it was good, or at least good enough, and there wasn't nearly the
Mm.
level of public discourse like you might have today on YouTube or whatever. It was nothing even close to that, right? So just my family and VHS tapes I had access to, and Star Wars is one of those things. And I don't even think Star Trek had quite like Star Trek was starting to get into movies. They were in that time. They'd been doing a little bit of that in the '80s with the old generation crew, which I had a little bit of exposure to. But Star Trek it's not the same. It's not. It's even when they go full action, it's nowhere close. It's nowhere close to Star Wars. I mean, maybe I'm not articulating this well enough, but my experience with it was truly, do I want to watch something that is space, battles, fun, Like that was my mindset. Just that was what it was. X-wings were the standard. It was the kind of movie that sort of made standards for me in a lot of ways. There are other ones as well, but you know what I know is science fiction. I had some exposure to Star Trek, and I had Star Wars. And Star Wars is not science fiction, as we talked about in earlier episodes. You know, it's space fantasy. It's a space opera at the very best. But yeah, I don't. Does that help you? Does that give you a starting place?
Yeah. Luke, how about you? What was it about Star Wars, or what is it about the original Star Wars that kind of captured you or grabbed your attention?
Well, as I said in the first episode, it was grabbing the 20-year anniversary VHS tapes, being like, I remember seeing those movies, watching them and being like, I didn't remember anything from those movies. But as I watched them, going, I think I know how they made that. And the technical, like, possibility that opened in my mind was awesome, because back then I was shooting on, like high 8 video camera. This was actually my second one, because my first one I used so much that one day when I ejected the tape, a piece flew out because it wore out. So like I was making movies using nothing, and to see people using low quality stuff to make high quality images was just mind blowing. Like I was like, this is so cool. I'm so excited about this. Right. So I actually just kind of saw all of them for the first time, for the second time on VHS when it was the 20-year anniversary. And I picked them up at Target or whatever, and I was like, oh, okay, these are really cool. And I like the possibility. Where could this take me as far as like what's possible in filmmaking, and what's the experience of going and seeing a movie? Like, what is this? And I love it.
Yeah. I have another thought on this. I think I just maybe realized. I think this might have been one of my first exposures to movies going into magic, because the Force is in essence, it works like magic would in many other stories, right? You put your hand out and something flies to you and you catch it, or you wave your hand, someone thinks something different, right? The Force is one of my first exposures to magic in that trilogy, in cinema, I should say. It's also one of my first exposures to dogfighting, because you've got TIE fighters and X-wings and the Millennium Falcon, and they shoot that footage to be very specifically like World War II movies and World War II actual footage of B-12 bombers and stuff getting attacked. Like they did it very purposely like that. So it's some of my first exposure. I mean, it's also knights. Now I had other movies and stories that were knight-like, or actually about knights. Or had knights as characters, but Star Wars had some of my first exposure to some of the things that I've definitely grown into still loving, which is dogfighting, aerial or space. Because again, the space combat in that is not, it's not Battlestar Galactica. It's not really truly frictionless and moving in the same, like it is dogfighting, but you're in space. It is knights, but they have laser swords. It is magic, but it's the Force, right? Like, this is some of my first exposure as a kid to any of those more foundational ideas, but through the Star Wars lens. And that was one of the first movies that I ever saw those concepts in.
Sure. I wonder if this is why the Star Wars universe is so fun to imagine and to, kind of expand on, despite the trilogy and prequel trilogy and post, despite the recent failures, this world is great because it's giving you the option to be like, what would it be like if you were a knight who also flew, who also had magic? Like any of those things are possible, and you can use them at any time in whatever context you want. Like, wouldn't that be awesome? It'd be like, yeah, that would be awesome. And so there's a world, a universe of experience that you can mix and match whatever you want and be like, sweet. So dragons, yeah, that can happen. It's an ice dragon in a cave, and what, but like anything is possible in this universe. What do you want to do with it today? And that's cool.
Scott, before we go any further on that, let me hear from you. What is your thing about Star Wars? What's your experience? What's your love come from?
Yeah, I mean, I didn't get into Star Wars until I was in junior high, and at that point, it was mostly because I had a friend who loved Star Wars and ended up going and buying the movies and watching them, and just there's definitely an element of world building in Star Wars that is very unique, and still feels very present at the same time. And I say that from the standpoint of, I feel like when you watch the movies, I think one of the great storytelling elements that Lucas did, especially in episode 4, was he took the time to bring you into the world, right? You get these moments that um, might keep the story moving at a slightly slower pace, but ultimately you get this sense of, I am present in this world. And so then you have all these other cool things like lightsabers and the Force and blasters and spaceships, but it's real because you're in the world already. And I mean, it's really tough to build a world in that way without, and I think it starts well before and could exist without a lot of the like dogfighting elements that you're talking about, Jonathan. But at the same time, the freedom that you mentioned, Luke, to be like, okay, here's this incredible world. What do we want to do today? Like, you could do pretty much anything. I mean, like there is some limitlessness to the possibilities that he created by drawing us into that world. By anytime you want going to a different planet, having a completely different landscape, and trying to figure out how we're surviving or how we're, going to build up our forces so that we can go attack the bad guys. I mean, it's a very, for something that is so not what we currently exist in, where space travel is slow and tough and dangerous, to all of a sudden have this freedom about it, I think is very interesting. So there's definitely some of that philosophical what ifs that I definitely lean towards in the storytelling. But I almost think that this might even be the beginning of me kind of jumping into the, wow, that's an interesting thought. Maybe I should think about this more kind of stuff in, more areas in my life as well. So yeah, that's kind of my story, and a lot of the stuff that I love about Star Wars. Um, as we look at what we could now call episode 4 specifically, and I do want to remind people that that movie was made as if it was a one-off movie, right? Lucas did not know, nor did anyone else know, that they were going to be making more movies in this world. So what is it about that film, that singular film, not anything else from the prequels, sequels, or even rest of the original trilogy, that is good? Like, what did they do in this movie from your guys' perspective that was good?
It's interesting that you asked, like, as we asked that question, I think, and it's like younger me didn't really like the movie until it's Han Solo, Luke Skywalker, and Obi-Wan Kenobi going on a rescue mission to save the princess. Until they're actually doing that, and they've left Tatooine, and they're gonna get caught by the Death Star, and there's the training sequence before that, and they're in the Death Star, and they're all running around doing different things, and they rescue the princess, and they got to get out of there, and that's all, And then after that, you're just going right into really fast. You're going right into the trench run, and that's the big climax of the movie, and all of that. As a kid, in particular, I liked all of that, and even now, when I watch the movie, that is the stuff that I'm kind of there for. I know it's interesting because I know that plenty of people think about or talk about this idea of like Luke looking at the twin suns, for instance, and how iconic that image is and how much that means to some people about, longing for more in your life or dreaming. And as a guy who definitely thinks about story a lot and cares, and I can, especially watching it now, I can definitely sense the sort of gravitas of that, or I can see where people come with that. And I really do believe it's that sequence in particular is so much Williams. It's like so much of this movie is John Williams doing really good stuff. And then at the end, you find out later, years later, we find out that George's wife is actually the one who, in a lot of ways, saved Star Wars and made the edit of the trench run to what we know it today. And that trench run is so, I think, so pivotal to that movie having any success in a lot of ways. Like that trench run is sort of in a way everything. It's not. There's other things that are done well. I can go, Obi-Wan Kenobi showing up in a hood and being not quite what you expect, and talking about his father and showing off a light. Like, that's all good stuff. The canteen having aliens in it, and Han Solo shooting first, and like, there's good dynamics and stuff going on throughout the movie. But as a kid with potentially a lower attention span, the desert stuff didn't matter. The droid stuff didn't matter. I didn't care about the droids very much. I just wanted to get to the space battles and the rescue mission and the funny lines from Han Solo and stuff like that. That's what even today, again, I still I'm in there. So my whole thing is, there's lots of good stuff in this movie in various ways. But what I always think about is kind of from the meeting Han Solo on, not because Han Solo makes the movie, but he's sort of that turning point of, now we're finally leaving all the setup and we're going to go do stuff. We're going to go on the adventure. We're going to go storm the castle. We're going to go meet Princess Leia for real. We're going to do the real stuff now. That's where I always think is that adventure sequence.
Yeah, Luke, I'm curious to hear your position on this, just from the standpoint of, I know how much you love the technical stuff. So, help me understand. We can go back and we can look and we can see that Lucas was groundbreaking in a lot of the technical stuff that he did in this film. But help me understand the particular elements in this film that you found just completely groundbreaking.
Well, I hadn't watched that many movies, right? Like, I didn't grow up watching a lot of movies or television. Like, that was not something I did. But then sitting down and seeing Star Wars, where they push a button and the door flips up, or they push a button and a light blade comes out that they can whack other things with, right? Or you can like see the blaster bolt go across the plane or whatever, or you're on a speeder that's hovering above the desert and you're just zooming along, right? Like, how are you doing this? And then you get to the trench run, right? You've got space battles going on, these, everything's flying in and out. You got tractor beams. Like, how did you do this, right? You got holographs, like, this is all great. And even the droids, right? Like, how did you do that? Right now, this is early on, but like, how'd you do it? And it's people, right? But like, you make it happen. And this is great, right? Like, this is all phenomenal that you're able to make these images come to life and be real. I think there's something else though, where what's great about the first film is they introduce just about everything, right? Like, this is a standalone movie that introduces just about everything that we are still living with today, right? Like,
well, can I just say, to your point earlier in this discussion about how Star Wars is a world you can do anything, some have criticized Star Wars, like Red Letter Media, for instance, has at least one guy who's criticized and saying, you can't actually do much in the Star Wars universe. And I'm not sure I agree. I actually tend to be more where you are, Luke. But with the movies that we've gotten, not the prequels, because they tried to do other things, but there's something about, different reasons for the prequel trilogy being stuff I don't like versus the new sequel trilogy being stuff I don't like. There's different reasons for the reasons I don't like those. But one of the things that's going on now in the most of the stuff that's new that's coming out is, it feels like it seems like that all these, maybe it's too much of an accusation, but I don't know. It just seems like these filmmakers who really loved Star Wars when they grew up and really got impacted by it, or Disney or whoever is sort of doing this, just has too much of a nostalgia play card where, like you just said, yeah, we keep on dealing with like Jawas, or is always a desert planet. Why is there always a desert planet? Like, Desert Planet just was the thing that was the starting place, and it was there to show that like there's nothing here, and Luke wanted out, and it made perfect sense, right? And I don't want to get into the sequel trilogy too much. I'm just saying there's a lot of playing that nostalgia card, a lot of playing the same things we've seen before. When you just you talk about this idea of Star Wars sort of introduces you to this world where you can be a laser sword knight who has magic, who can fly ships and blow things up. And you can be all those things all in one. You can be a samurai and a cowboy and Flash Gordon all at the same time, right? Like, that's kind of the fun of it in so many ways. And yet somehow it took I don't know. It just I feel like we've lost that a lot. So when you talk about Star Wars and we're still living with those things, you're absolutely right. We've introduced all these things, but like, what would it? I don't know what it's like to be in the '70s and not have seen anything like that, and then to see like you must be thinking that everything's insane. You're seeing Jawas, lightsabers, Millennium Falcon, X-wings, Death Stars. Yeah, you're seeing all this stuff that's probably hurtling at you. To me, Tatooine's kind of boring and it takes a while. Like there's some good stuff in there, but most of them like whatever. But if you're a brand new audience to this whole thing, is it just blowing your mind all the time because it's just throwing things at you constantly? You're just like, what is this? What is that?
Even the title crawl, right? Like, how in the world, right? Like, this is new. We've never seen anything like this, and no one's come up with something different since then, right? Like, this is amazing. You have the text going this way, like that's unbelievable, right?
Right.
Like,
yeah.
So many cool things from the very beginning.
And yes, and I've always heard stories too about the Death Star, right? If you were in the theater for the first time and there's this little ship that goes by, you're like, wow, it's amazing. And then this giant ship just takes over the entire screen as it shoots lasers in space. And everyone's like, what?
Yeah.
So I guess spectacle, to sort of to Luke's technical side too.
And what I like too, it's a spectacle that I hadn't experienced before. Truly just spectacle.
I mean,
and I think there's something to the idea that this is spectacle that we haven't seen since. It's a lot like Matrix, where it's like now everybody's trying to copy it, right? Like now everybody does Star Wars, but like it's not that. It's not that. You can copy the shot and put it in a prequel or a sequel, but it's still not that moment. That moment was so special and good for what it was.
Yeah, and I take a lot of that back to the spectacle being, I mean, really cool and something really unique, and at the same time keeping it within some very interesting storytelling, like the way they told the story. Like for me, that first scroll, as cool as it looks, gives you 3 paragraphs to say, here's the little bit of information you need to know. Now I'm going to tell you this story. And for the rest of the original movie, there's not a ton of dialogue. They don't use any tricks like voiceover. There's a lot of things that they don't do that we do in movies now that to a certain extent can be crutches. There are movies that use these elements well and do voiceover and flashback and other things well, but the choices made by Lucas to tell this story as I am just literally going to tell you this story, it doesn't, as flashy as it's going to be with all these cool tech elements, the rest of it I can literally just sit back, be very simplistic, and as long as I know how good my story is, I know it's going to work.
I would like to make a comparison between Star Wars and Mad Max Fury Road because, of course, I would. But one of the things about Mad Max Fury Road is when we talk about world building and how they tell a story, there is a little bit of setup at the very beginning of what this world is. Just very briefly, you definitely get the idea that like the world's been blown up and people are dealing with the world after that. But the vast majority of the movie does not explain explicitly through dialogue or anything. It just shows you that, like, hey, here's this guy. He's doing this. Like you just come in, you're observing the world, right? You're just observing what's happening. You're seeing a story unfold. You've got a fish out of water character that you're going through, right? But you're not getting lots of exposition in a sense, but you are at the same time just by observing. Star Wars definitely has some dialogue about the Clone Wars. It definitely it hints at things here and there, but a lot of it too is just like these characters are talking about. Even the actors talk about in documentaries later, right? About how like I don't know what I was saying half the time, right? It's all these lines about technologies or wars that happened or different things that they take for granted, and you get a sense of the world by what you see and what's happening. But Lucas doesn't explain it. Right? He doesn't take a lot of time to explain. The only thing he really explains ever is the Force. And everything else is just sort of, that's what it is. It's the Millennium Falcon. It's the ship that ran the thing in 12 parsecs. And you're like, what?
Right? Like it just is. It's just what it is.
That is great world building, because the world is bigger than this little story. And that's awesome. And then now we're here today where we're still telling the same stupid story instead of going beyond it, But yeah.
Well, and I know that we could do a whole nother episode on this, but I think there's a certain element of not explaining things from that first film that gets broken as soon as we get the original or the prequel trilogy. Because in episode 1, how much time are we explaining the midichlorians or something else?
Yes, exactly. Because we're now telling a story that doesn't need to be told. And this happens a lot with prequels, because it's like, we already told you that story. It was a line of dialogue and it was way cooler.
Well, because it's left to your imagination as opposed to fleshing it out. I mean, I do believe there is something about potentially fleshing out some ideas and stories to make something actually, like, it actually can build up and make something more resonant. The hard part is I feel that every prequel has a big hurdle to go over, which is exactly what you guys are talking about. Is like, why should we tell this story? Why should we know? If we already know where we're going, we already know what's happened to some extent. What's really going to be revealed that's going to be making this grander, deeper, more resonant, more helpful? Like, you didn't start the story here, and you didn't start the story here for some reason. So why didn't we start the story here? Because we don't need that part of the story for the story that we care about. I'd also like to reiterate from, I believe, episode 1 or whatever episode it was when we mentioned this, just that George, whatever you camp you're in, if you think that George is full of it when he says he had all Star Wars in his head and then he just had to make it small, and so he made this small movie first, or if you believe that he had everything or whatever it is, George gets to a point where he wants to tell a story about microbiology and all sorts of different stuff. That's what his treatments for the sequel trilogy were. He had something in his head at some point, I don't know when, but he had something in his head he wanted to go through. And Star Wars is not that. Star Wars that he made was not that story, was not about that. But maybe to him, it was the setting ground for that, right? And this is another thing where you put something out, people love that. And if you wanted to do something else with that, people may not go with you because they don't necessarily want to go where you want to go. They like the thing you did.
Yeah. And I think that brings us to a reasonably good stopping point for this episode. So, gentlemen, I am going to once again ask my favorite question. What is something that you are looking forward to watching soon? This can be a good recommendation for all of you viewers out there, and we do hope you enjoy this segment. Jonathan, how about you?
What am I looking forward to watching soon? Interesting way of phrasing that question. I've been watching a lot of TV shows. I've been binging TV shows, and so I haven't been watching a lot of movies, and movies have been very much on hold recently. I mean, okay, I'm still looking forward to Dune. I still want to see Dune whenever Dune shows up, and there's some images that have shown up, and that makes me more excited. But as far as something you could watch like tomorrow, you can go watch. I'll go watch Star Wars again. Seriously. Good. Get Disney Plus. Watch the stupid special edition because you can't find any other version. But watch Star Wars again. Just watch the original and see how you feel about it. You probably, I mean, I don't know if you're that person who watches it all the time, or if you're anything like me, you might be like, I've seen that movie so many times. Why do I need to watch it again? I would recommend watch it again. See what you think about it. Tell me what you feel about it. Leave a comment, because you may find that some things work far better than you remember them working. You may find that other things don't work at all for you anymore. But just give it a watch again. Just give it a shot. That last 20 minutes or whatever, that trench run sequence is just so dang good on every level. I dare you to watch that and not get some level of exhilaration.
Luke, how about you?
I don't know if I'm looking forward to watching anything. I don't know of anything that's coming.
So sad.
I don't know of anything, but I'll put a link in the description and watch the thing about how editing saves Star Wars, because everybody can say what a genius George is, and then you watch that and you're like, wow, thank goodness his wife saved that movie.
Yep.
All right. My recommendation for tonight, trying to stick to something that I've come to recently that I think to a certain extent, captures some of the same elements of Star Wars. And so it is both a TV show that was sadly canceled, and then a movie that was made afterwards.
Oh, I know where you're going.
Do you know where I'm going?
Are you talking about Serenity right now?
The movie is Serenity,
Yeah,
and the TV
buddy.
show is Firefly.
Yeah.
I don't know that since Star Wars there has been anything that captures a similar spirit as much as this TV series and this movie. There are some similar storytelling elements that I was just thinking about during this episode that I think is just absolutely amazing, that are similar to what we had in Star Wars. It's certainly a different world, but it creates a world that theoretically is done in the same way, and I highly recommend it. It's definitely slightly more mature, but I highly, highly, highly recommend it.
I would like to second that recommendation and also mention that might be an entire other episode of trying to talk about what you think the commonalities between Star Wars and Serenity and Firefly are, because that's fascinating observation.
I will
just say this.
I'm going to jump in here, and I'm going to say, if you want something else that fits in this kind of vibe world, check out Cowboy Bebop, which is also a television show and movie that is also a space, swashbuckling weirdo thing. It's great.
Space westerns.
Yes.
That's a thing. Like, space westerns get a lot of what Star Wars is, because it's also a space western.
Yep.
Just saying.
Very good. Well, thanks for joining us. We hope you've enjoyed this, and we'll see you again next time.
Yes, we will, if you push play.
Please press play. We're begging you.
Push play, push it.
Seriously though, thanks for hanging out.